What would you do if you were trapped inside of a mall during a zombie apocalypse? If you said you would drink a lot of wine while skateboarding your way around the mall and chucking soda cans at the zombies, then I want to be your new best friend because you can do all of those things and more in Dead Rising. See, in 2006, Capcom decided to venture out from their doom and gloom filled property of Resident Evil and introduce the world to Frank West, a freelance photojournalist that finds himself chasing after the scoop of the century in the town of Willamette, Colorado. Only Frank has no idea what this case has in store for him. And today, we are going to take a look back on a game that I've always wanted to play when I was younger, but never got the chance to as I didn't have the consoles until much later on. Now, over the course of this video, we will be playing through the story, obtaining the S ending, or the true ending of the game, and answering the question of how exactly does Dead Rising 1 hold up nearly 2 decades later. Frank West, a determined freelance photojournalist, arrives in Willamette, Colorado, after receiving a tip that something big is about to happen in the town. Upon arrival, Frank sees the town cordoned off by military forces, and violent attacks are happening out in the streets. He is shuttled to the Willamette Parkview Mall via helicopter pilot Ed DeLuca and dropped off with a 72-hour window before Ed will return. And once airdropped onto the mall, Frank briefly meets a man on the roof who asks him if he is a journalist before giving him a bunch of cryptic answers to Frank's questions. We then venture inside and meet other survivors who are currently working on barricading the mall entrances when we see our first zombies up close. Frank gets recruited by Ryan LaRosa to help with building up the defenses before an old woman sees her dog outside and unlocks the doors, compromising the barricade, and allowing for the zombies to breach the mall, which kicks off the next 72 hours in our Dawn of the Dead simulator. We hear a man yell for everyone to get up the stairs, and we fight our way up to the second floor, and back to the security office where we started. Here we meet Brad and Jesse, who we will come to learn are Department of Homeland Security officers, and Otis, the mall janitor who welds shut the entrance to the security room and gives Frank a walkie-talkie to help keep in contact with as we venture back out into the mall and try and figure out just what in the hell is going on. We enter and exit the safe house through the mall's ventilation ducts, and when we exit back out onto the roof, we encounter our first in-game survivor, and we get introduced to one of the game's primary gameplay loops: escort missions. We introduce ourselves to Jeff Mayer, and we learn that he is searching for his wife. But he must have cataracts, as his wife is literally just around the corner on the roof with him. But we agree to help him find her anyways, and Jeff joins our party. We do get a chunk of experience for the trouble, though, and trust me on this mechanic will lead to some trouble at some point later down the road. And so, after reuniting the happy couple, we snap a heartwarming photo before escorting them roughly 50 feet back to the safe house and get yet another big experience bump, along with a level up. Here is where we learn how leveling works in Dead Rising. See, each time that you gain enough experience, be it from story missions, boss fights, escorts, or killing zombies, you will level up. When you level up, Frank will improve in a single category of his stats: health, stock, skill, speed, attack, or throw. Each attribute affecting the way that Frank plays and your odds for survival as the game goes on. However, the attribute that improves on level up is random, which means that you could face a grueling trajectory of improvements right from the start, or get a significant power bump, all dependent on the RNG gods' flights of fancy. And after dealing with the Myers, we finally venture back down into the mall, and we start dealing with our first zombies. Now, unlike Resident Evil, who Capcom has stated focused on quality over quantity, Dead Rising tries to pack in as many zombies as it possibly can into its areas for you to deal with. There are many indirect quotes that I found, but no official answer on exactly how many can be seen on screen at any given time. But just from looking at the game, it wouldn't be far-fetched to say that the number is in the hundreds. However, there is a more complicated answer than that. See, the number of zombies rendered into an area and their aggressiveness are both directly tied to your frame rate, which on the 360 was stable. But on PC, well, let's just say the game becomes 4 times as difficult, for example, when playing at 120 FPS. Now, a big point in Dead Rising is trying to navigate through its locations in the most optimal fashion to keep your resources for when you really need them and avoiding being eaten. Unless that's your thing. These resources, however, are found by scavenging the various stores in the mall, and from certain enemy drops like the police zombies that carry handguns or batons. Inventory management exists in Dead Rising, but if you are familiar with other survival horror titles, it isn't nearly as focused as those are. Item management is really just broken down to finding healing items, weapons, and skill books, while all key items are stored in your key items directory and not really managed. Anyways, venturing out into Paradise Plaza, we have plenty of stores here to scavenge in, including the Juice Bar, where we learn about another mechanic in Dead Rising that is very, very important. Mixing drinks. If you bring 2 food items to a location with a blender, you can mix the 2 and receive a stronger healing item with a special effect, such as Quick Step, which makes you move faster, or Untouchable, which prevents you from being grabbable by zombies. Both of these perks being really good throughout your playthrough, and you'll probably want to learn how to make them and make them as much as possible as you go. And so, after we stock up on smoothies and we grab ourselves a skateboard, we shred our way right on over to the food court in search of Brad. And in doing so, we stumble our way right into the first boss fight of the game, Carlito. We find Brad in the middle of a shootout in the food court with the man that we met on the roof earlier. Brad gives us a handgun, and we join the fray, taking shots at Carlito when he pops up from behind cover and dodging his shots and grenades until we whittle his health down from far away, and he escapes just like a villain out of a Bond movie. As a note, there is a hidden Uzi in the food court if you were to climb up one of the signs, which is very handy and a lot better than the handgun, so if you want to make this a piece of cake, go ahead and climb up there and grab the Uzi. Anyways, after Carlito escapes, Frank tries to get some information out of Brad, but gets brushed off until he shows Brad a picture of some old dude that we saw at the start of the game. Brad then agrees to work together, and we start to head back to where we last saw our senior citizen. This is where we get introduced to another main game mechanic, the scoop queue. That is, after we get a call from Otis, who lets us know about a strange thing that he sees on the mall's cameras. Now, the game runs on a 72-hour clock, and when Otis lets us know about these scoops, there will be a certain amount of time that the scoop will remain active for. These are basically side missions, most of which are survivor escorts, and others being psycho bosses, which we will get into here in just a little bit. All of which, however, are good sources of PowerPoints, or PP, for levels, if you have the time to go and complete them. And so we follow Brad back to the entrance plaza and try to negotiate with Dr. Barnaby. However, Dr. Barnabas won't budge from his store shelter unless we can guarantee a safe escape for him. So, Brad heads back to the safe house to talk to Jesse, and we have a scoop to investigate in the meantime. We head back to Paradise Plaza and meet with a fellow photographer, Kent, who gives us a full tutorial on how the photo system works in Dead Rising through his little side quest. And Kent teaches us through failure and frustration rather than text box tutorial. See, Kent wants you to take pictures of him doing certain poses and actions, but he will do everything in his power to prevent you from actually taking those pictures. And after finishing capturing Kent's photographic qualities, he then challenges us to get an erotic photo worth at least 1,000 pp and to bring it back to him later on. See, there were various categories for photos such as horror, comedy, drama, and even erotica in the original game. And each time you take a photo, you get experience points based on the size of the circles that pop up within the focus of the lens. So it is a way to get some experience points by just playing into Frank's journalistic side. And once Kent runs off, we head back to the safe room and form a plan with Brad and Jesse to get Barnaby back to the safe house and to get ready for the exfil in 3 days' time. This is the first point where the game just opens up to you to explore, as we have until the next morning before our case file is ready. During this time, Otis will call Frank and let him know about any survivors that he finds on the monitors, and Frank can go and scavenge for resources and escort any survivors back to the safe house. Using these downtime sections of Dead Rising is paramount for later success, as you can learn where items you may want to use will spawn, and you have no time pressure to gather up some healing items. Taking this time to also get some levels in is a smart idea, so we go off to find some people to help, locating a few people over in Al Fresca Plaza and leading them back through Central Park towards the safe house. However, once we start making our way back through the park, we are greeted by a cutscene introducing us to our first psycho enemies, the convicts. This is a trio of escaped convicts that have stolen a military vehicle and are running down survivors that venture out into Central Park. The convicts are a unique mini-boss enemy, as by defeating them you gain a small bump of XP and gain access to driving the car, as well as the ability to take the heavy machine gun for your troubles. But them not being a true boss, and only being a mini-boss, means they will respawn on the morning of the following day. However, our primary goal right now is just to save these survivors, so we take a wide berth around them back to safety. Once back at the warehouse, we see that something weird is going on with the zombies here. A wasp is flying around, and when Frank finally brings out the raid spray to get rid of it, all of the nearby zombies just die immediately in the most gruesome fashion possible. And after the dirty fireworks end, we take the time to finish escorting the survivors back to the safe house, and then head back down into the mall. This time, off to explore Wonderland Plaza, where a roller coaster has been running and drawing much unwanted attention. We make our way over and find the control console for the roller coaster, but before we can turn it off, Frank gets ambushed by our first true psychopath boss, Adam the Clown. But also, really quickly,
what mall has a roller coaster in it?
See, Adam is our first foray into the psychos of Dead Rising. However, we don't really get a full sense of what is up with Adam just from the gameplay. See, a psychopath boss is someone who was in Willamette and lost their mind when the outbreak happened, entering into a state of psychosis. Adam specifically was a children's entertainer at the mall, and when the outbreak happened, he witnessed many children being attacked and eaten alive, and his sanity snapped. We now have to fight Adam, who uses his clown gags as attacks against us, including his toy chainsaws, which are anything but toys, balloons that have various powders in them, hope you get the green one, throwing knives, which are sharp, and even a fire breath? He has a fire breath. He has a fire breath. A quick little side note about Adam here is that if you are playing on the PC version of Dead Rising 1 and have your FPS set to 60 FPS or higher, there is a very high probability that Adam the Clown will just one-shot you and or will break your weapons anytime he guards. The reason is because there is a glitch. As we stated, the 360 version was capped to 30 FPS. And, well, there's a lot of things that are tied to FPS in this game, some of which is damage-based. And Adam is one of those things. After dealing with Adam, we turn off the ride and free Greg, a mall security guard who tells us that he knows a shortcut back to Paradise Plaza, as well as being able to pick up Adam's toy chainsaws, which are arguably the best melee weapons in the game. And so, after we find a shortcut and head back to the safe house, with Greg unfortunately getting cut off by zombies and perishing on the way back. So sad. The following morning, we catch a new juicy scoop forming on the monitors when we see that Dr. Barnaby has been captured by Carlito. Brad then rushes off after Carlito, and we follow close behind, arriving shortly after Brad back at the entrance plaza, where once again Brad pulls us out of the gunfire and into the fight with Carlito, who is now armed with a sniper rifle. This fight with Carlito is set up similar to the first one, except now instead of taking cover and shooting us, Carlito is packing much bigger heat. The fight is supposed to be challenging as Carlito is deadly and can keep you pinned down with a lot of the open area with his shots, while Brad is about as effective as a dry squirt gun. However, if you pick up an Uzi from Alfresca Plaza or the food court, you can make this fight go by relatively quickly. And what we end up doing is skating around the far side of the second floor, and when we get an opening, we pop out and repeatedly tap the shoot button, which will stun lock Carlito and not waste all of our bullets at one time during the fight, in order to deal a ton of damage. Remember, tap, not hold. We do not have enough bullets, however, to finish Carlito with the Uzi, but after a swig of our smoothie juice and a very rare but good assist from Brad, we bring down the villain once again. However, Carlito escapes one more time, this time after shooting and wounding Brad. We manage to then save Dr. Barnaby and drag Brad back to the safe house, but Brad needs medicine. So I guess it's time that we head to the pharmacy. And as we begin beelining our way to the supermarket, we find that the place is completely clear of zombies. However, when we try to enter the service hall to the pharmacy, we are met by some strange sounds, and we investigate. A couple aisles over, and we come face to face with our next psycho, Steven. And we find out that See, Steven is the overprotective owner of Sion's supermarket, and in his psychosis, believes that every survivor he finds in the supermarket is a vandalizer who he must defend his precious store from. The Steven fight can be troublesome if you don't have a strong weapon or weapons, and you try to stay too close to him. But luckily, we have the chainsaws, and Steven doesn't last all that long against us. The good thing about this fight taking place in the supermarket, though, is that if you do take damage, you can always pick up endless food items laying around the place to heal yourself here. And after dealing with Steven, we have a brief exchange with Isabella before she runs off, and we pick up the medicine for Brad to bring back to the safe house, where, after dropping off the medicine, we have some more downtime to wait through. But we have been tipped off about some strange goings-ons over in Chrislip's home saloon. And so we head back to the North Plaza to investigate. And once inside the store, we are snuck up on by Cliff, a Vietnam veteran who is experiencing vivid flashbacks and believes that he's back in the war, having used his guerrilla combat skills to dispatch and display dead zombies throughout the hardware store. Cliff believes us to be the enemy, and the fight begins with Cliff using hit-and-run tactics on Frank. Cliff will try to hit Frank and then disappear into various maintenance shafts around the store, before popping out onto some shelves and lobbing smoke bombs at Frank before repeating the cycle, which can be a bit frustrating to deal with and take a bit of time if you're not on the ball. And after defeating Cliff, he comes back to his senses and tells Frank what happened to him. See, he was at the mall with his granddaughter and watched the zombies get to her, which caused him to white out and spiral into his past. See, the psychos in Dead Rising aren't all just bad guys. Many of them are just unfortunate victims trapped in the same hell that Frank finds himself in, and he is becoming more aware of this as his survival continues. We then take Cliff's machete and make our way back to the safe house to get ready for the next case. Back at the safe house, cue the Batman spin, we start trying to find answers about what Isabella meant by what happened in Santa Cabeza, and we see her back at the supermarket on the cameras. But with no one willing to talk at the safe house, Frank then sets out to confront Isabella and get some answers. However, while Frank is running to find Isabella, I should probably take a moment to explain skill books because they are very important in Dead Rising, and we haven't exactly covered them yet. See, throughout the game, you will go through many items as their durability and or their ammo depletes. However, in the bookstores that litter the mall, you can pick up various skill books that will give Frank better use over items. Some of them will give Frank more experience points for certain actions or more health recovery, and others will increase the durability of certain types of weapons. Finally, I have 3 skill books in my inventory currently. One increases the durability of entertainment items, and the other increases the durability of tools. The last one has an overlap, which affects both categories. And with these books, this is allowing my skateboards to have 3 times the durability, and my chainsaws to have 3 times the durability, so that they last a whole lot longer. Having to route in skill books for what you plan to use is important, as holding them does take up 1 slot in your inventory per book. However, once back at the supermarket, we encounter Isabella, who is not exactly keen on giving us an exclusive. She saddles up on a motorcycle and we begin our next boss fight. And Isabella is dangerous to get close to.
You can really say that about any of the bosses, but much more so with the ones that use vehicles.
So we employ the same strategy as we did with Carlito 2, but we have to hurdle her every time she tries to run us over. And before long, Isabella crashes and we convince her to explain what is going on. She agrees to bring Carlito to us after she finishes what she's doing, but we have to wait at an unmarked store in the North Plaza at midnight. This is also where we find out that Isabella is Carlito's sister. And so, with nothing to do but wait, we head back out into the mall. This time, back to Wonderland Plaza, where we find a disturbing sight waiting for us in one of the stores. See, inside the lovely fashion house, we see that multiple women have been captured and tied up by a morbidly obese and corrupt police officer psycho named Joe Slade. Now, while the previous 2 psycho bosses have had sad backstories to help explain how they wound up in the state that they are in when we find them, Joe is the first truly evil individual we encountered during the outbreak. See, her goal in all of this is to capture young women around the mall and to sexually assault them, as it is alluded to. Frank intervenes and squares off against this monster, ultimately taking her down and freeing her captives, which he then escorts back to the safe house. Where Frank then learned that Dr. Barnaby has told the DHS agents that the zombies are a byproduct of a drug ring that originated in Santa Cabeza. And we are still waiting for the time to meet with Isabella to get some more information about Carlito on this. And then Frank heads back into the mall as Otis has informed him of someone hiding from a group that seems to be hunting survivors over at the entrance plaza. Where we learn that there is a family, a father and his 2 sons, who have been shooting survivors in entrance plaza to train them to kill anything that moves. This is our next psycho boss, is Roger Hall and his 2 sons. These psychos, having a rather strong belief in their right to bear arms and a general uncaring look at life. And so Frank chases down the Hall family one at a time and saves both Floyd, an elderly man, and Wayne, who was the family's target before Frank stepped in to save them. Once more bringing the survivors back to the safe house before venturing back to the North Plaza and finding the gun store, where inside, a scared and defensive redneck, Cletus, threatens to shoot anyone who tries to get near him and his store. And once Cletus is dealt with, we see that Frank didn't kill him, but in his panic, Cletus rushes out of the store and gets swarmed by zombies, putting it into the trunk and supplying Frank with a reliable source of firearms for the remainder of the game. And once done with Cletus, we head over to the meat location and wait for Isabella to show up, which she does, alone, injured, and being attacked by a zombie. We then save Isabella and find out that Carlito shot her in his growing distrust and fanaticism. She then passes out, leaving Frank to carry her back to the safe house, where Brad asks what is going on, and the group agrees to question Isabella when she wakes up. So, once again, we have some downtime until the next case, but there isn't much to do, so we skip ahead. Once the clock hits 3 a.m. on the 21st, Isabella wakes up and the questioning begins. By Isabella's account, there was no drug ring in Santa Cabeza, but she does say that there was an American research facility, and the lead researcher of that facility was Dr. Barnaby, who was researching a parasitic wasp. We then see that Jesse is being attacked by Barnaby, and the group fights him off before Barnaby begins to turn into a zombie. Before he turns, however, he admits to the allegation and confirms Isabella's story, explaining that while researching ways to cut the cost of breeding livestock for mass production of meat, they accidentally created zombie livestock, and the virus spread. Barnaby then turns and Brad shoots him, putting an end to Dr. Barnabas. Isabella then tells us that the wasps escaped from the lab and began infecting her village, and that's how the outbreak started. And so, to get back at the American government, Carlito plotted starting an outbreak on American soil, and they came to Willamette. We now have to wait until 11 a.m. before the next case starts, and you now have quite a bit of time to explore the mall and gather items. However, since we already have the items I want in pretty good health, we just spend the time waiting safely at the safe house. These points of the game do get a bit tiring because you have to wait it out, or you have to go explore. Sometimes there's things to do, other times it's just dead air and it kind of just fluctuates. So do with that as you will. However, after waiting for the next case to start, we learn that Carlito planned on blowing up the mall if he ever got cornered. He's now feeling like he's cornered. These explosives would blow caches of the parasitic larvae into the atmosphere, spreading the virus after the blast as well as leveling the compound. So we rush out of the safe house, restock on a new skateboard before shredding our way across the park and towards the underground parking garage, or the maintenance tunnels, whatever you want to call it. We grab a hold of a parked motorcycle before heading down, and here is where the big thing of Case 7-1 is. The tunnels! The tunnels are where we see the sheer amount of zombies that can be seen at any given time, as the underground area is flooded with zombies and is extremely dangerous to traverse on foot. This is why we grab the motorcycle to quickly speed our way in and start finding the bombs that are hidden throughout the tunnels in box trucks. Now, a quick note about this section. While we do have a motorcycle, we quickly get rid of it in favor of a box truck, and then later for a car because, just like your equipment, vehicles also have durability, and getting stranded in the middle of the underground is almost certainly a death sentence. Additionally, the entire time we are running around searching for the bombs that Carlito has staged, Carlito is chasing us down in a box truck while lobbing grenades after us. Case 7-1 is the hardest case you will come to in a casual playthrough of Dead Rising. There is a timed objective, massive hordes of zombies, a labyrinthian leveled layout, and a boss fight all at once, which can be overwhelming on a first playthrough. Now, you don't have to fight Carlito to complete the case, but it is a good idea to take the time to do so, as it makes completing the case much, much simpler overall. If you do end up defeating Carlito in the tunnels, a cutscene will play with Carlito running off and Brad telling Frank to focus on finding the bombs while he goes to deal with Carlito. Now, in Bomb Collector, there are 5 bombs in total down in the tunnels, and once all 5 are gathered, Frank just needs to get them back to the tunnel entrance where we see him load all of them into a shopping cart and push them back out above ground, doing this before they detonate and preventing the disaster from happening. We then cut to a warehouse area where we see Brad and Carlito in a standoff before Brad gets bested and thrown out into the tunnels, straight into a horde of zombies. Once the cutscene ends, we hop into a vehicle and speed our way back to the safe house. However, one last thing about Case 7 is that if you do go back into the tunnels and go to the warehouse area, you will get a small cutscene with Brad, and you'll watch him turn before going back to the safe house. Once the next case starts, we are partnering up with Isabella to go and investigate Carlito's hideout and to see if we can get any information off of his computer. So we follow Isabella all the way back to the North Plaza and climb through a maintenance hatch located near the gun store. And finding Carlito's computer, however, it is locked, and Isabella sets to try and crack the password. Frank, in the meantime, gets a call from Jessie saying she saw something interesting on a security camera and that she wants him to come check it out. So we head on back. Once we're back at the safe house and see the footage, we end up seeing Carlito on the security cameras being dragged by a large man with a meat hook. And Jesse tells us that they are over in the maintenance tunnels underneath of the North Plaza. So, we then zoom our way back to the North Plaza, and using the maintenance tunnels key that we picked up earlier, we head down to the basement and enter the butcher shop, where we meet Larry Chang, our next psycho. Larry Chang is a Chinese immigrant who opened up a butcher shop and, after going insane in the outbreak, thinks of zombies as spoiled meat while looking at humans as fresh meat for his shop. One interesting thing about Larry is that he is the only psycho who will not outright attack Frank when the boss fight begins. Frank must attack Larry before he becomes hostile, as Larry does view Frank as his friendly customer at first. However, while friendly towards his customer, once angered, Larry is definitely no pushover, facing Frank with cleavers, knives, even full-on pig carcasses, or even grabbing Frank and hoisting him up onto a meat hook if captured. Larry is a Dead by Daylight killer, and being close to Larry is deadly. And so, we deal with him much like we dealt with Carlito and Isabella earlier, auto-aiming with a sniper rifle and taking quick shots at a distance before trying to dodge anything that he throws at Frank. And before long, Larry does go down, and we get a chance to converse with a dying Carlito, leaving Frank with only a locket that he wants Isabella to have with him gone, and saying that what he started isn't over, before he bleeds out inside of the meat locker. We then make our way back to Isabella by 10 a.m. and we inform her of Carlito's passing, giving her the locket. Isabella unlocks the computer and stops the signal jammer that Carlito had set up, and we leave Isabella to grieve, making our way back to the safe house. We do get a call from Jessie letting us know that the line is freed up, and she begins to make her call to her headquarters. And after running back for a few more minutes, we get another call from Jessie where she informs Frank that DHS HQ is ignoring the incident and that the military is sending in a cleanup crew to make sure no evidence escapes the mall by midnight tonight. We make it all the way back to the warehouse before we get another cutscene of the military forces talking to Jessie and telling her that if she signs an agreement to keep quiet about the incident, then they will take her out of the area safely. We cut away before hearing screams, and a second soldier enters the safe room to find Jessie eating the first soldier. See, Jessie had actually been infected when Barnaby attacked her earlier, and now she has turned. Frank makes it back to the roof and tries to contact Jessie but gets no response. And once inside the safe room, he sees the corpses left behind and then finds Jessie wandering around in the back area. We then take a moment and put Jessie out of her misery. In the office, there is a note on the table from Otis asking Frank to forgive him as he stole a helicopter and got the rest of the survivors away from the mall, leaving just Frank and Isabella as the only survivors left, trapped in Parkview. Frank books it back to Isabella, but when the clock strikes midnight, we get a cutscene showing the military personnel beginning their operation to cleanse the mall. The military is active until 10 a.m. and are highly dangerous enemies to encounter. Luckily, there is nothing to do until the following day anyway, so you can safely sit in the hideout and wait the clock out if you want. If you do manage to take down a soldier, you can pick up their machine guns, which are strong weapons with lots of ammo. However, taking down a soldier requires a lot of resources, and they hit really hard. So you kind of have to weigh your options here on if it's worth it or not, but we do go down and take one out for a gun, and then quickly restock at the gun shop before waiting the rest of the night out in the hideout. The following morning, the military departs, and it's almost time for Ed to pick us up at the helipad. Talking to Isabella, she tells us to go and save ourselves, and she stays behind in the hideout. With all of the zombies dead and the military now gone, it is a quiet and easy run back to the roof, where we wait frantically to see if Ed will return. Frank begins to lose hope when the clock hits noon and there's no sign of Ed. But we then cut to a different perspective and see Ed spotting Frank from a nearby rooftop before taking off towards the mall excitedly. We are then greeted to the average Capcom helicopter scene. After the unfortunate business with Ed, the screen fades to black as zombies are seen approaching Frank on the helipad, and credits roll. This is ending A of Dead Rising, and you might be thinking, what? That's how it ends? And yes, that is one of the multiple endings of Dead Rising. However, ending A isn't a real ending. It's a fake ending that serves as a segue into overtime mode, where a new chapter opens up in a post-game chapter for you to play through and achieve the true ending of Dead Rising 1. The game fades back into the helipad where we see Frank resign himself to the zombies while Isabella is shooting them and calling out to Frank before he passes out. We wake back up in the hideout, and Isabella informs us that we somehow got infected during the previous 3 days, and that she might know a way to stave off the virus. But we're going to need a lot of equipment and a lot of queens. The start of this chapter requires us to venture back out into the mall in search of various tools for Isabella to craft the vaccine with, and both the zombies and the military are back in full force. It seems their cleanup crew didn't get rid of them all the previous night like they thought they did. And so, after obtaining all of the objects needed for Isabella across the mall, we return and find out that this vaccine was used by Carlito after he had infected a number of orphans in Santa Cabeza and sent them to the United States. The orphans, being unsuspecting virus carriers, primed and ready to spread outbreaks across America. We hand over all of the equipment to Isabella, but she needs power, and we go out to find her a new generator, stumbling into the crash site at Central Park. Here, we discover a giant hole has been blown into the clock tower, leading to a tunnel filled with zombies. We then find the generator nearby and return to Isabella to get to work on the vaccine. And so, what you are meant to do here is to go back out into the mall and fight through some zombie crowds to gather up 10 queens and bring them back to Isabella. A task that could take a while, as this is the next step to make the vaccine, and it can be incredibly taxing. However, you can speed this up in a few ways. The first way is to go down to the tunnels and just run back and forth in a vehicle until you get queens, and then repeat until you bring enough back. The fastest way, however, is through the use of a glitch called queen duping, which is what I did to get through this section, as it isn't super difficult to pull off and it takes a lot less time. To queen dupe, you need to have a queen in your inventory, preferably 2 in case you make a mistake, and to have items that you don't care about holding on to also in your inventory. Step 1 is to hold the queen near Isabella so that you see the give prompt, and then cycle to the next item in your hotbar, immediately hitting give a split second after hitting cycle. This also has to be done on 30 FPS. I find this works best with one-handed items or food items, but if you do it correctly, you will give Isabella the second item and keep the queen in your inventory. Regardless of your method, once you give Isabella 10 queens, she will create the vaccine and Frank will be saved. And after Frank gets his fix, Isabella then talks about making an anti-zombie pheromone, but that there isn't enough for prolonged or multiple uses. And so, with the pheromone in tow, Frank then shows Isabella the tunnels and the two descend into the zombie-filled pit, with only the pheromone and whatever Frank had on hand at the time of the cutscene in our inventory. So I caution you, before giving Isabella the last queen or item, to make sure you restock on anything that you could possibly want. Now, down in the tunnels, I have seen people play through this section and have zero problems with it, and I will always wonder how that is, because I have yet to have a smooth experience down in these tunnels. This is the final escort section of the game, where you need to stick close to Isabella, who is holding the pheromone, and get through the tunnels before that pheromone loses its strength and zombies can swarm you. You are meant to hold hands and guide Isabella through the horde, but for me at least, the two constantly getting knocked apart and separated, with Isabella focusing more on attacking zombies than trying to stay with Frank, is usually what happens instead of the two sticking together. Once you do get to the end of the tunnels, however, you need to carry Isabella to a military vehicle on the outside to make your escape. And we've done it! We're free! Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Is that a tank? That's right. The final boss fight is a multi-stage fight that starts with what the 2000s were known for. A rail shooter section. And once Frank and Isabella defeat the tank in the dam, ravine area, the tank knocks their vehicle over and the true final boss shows himself. Brock, the bane of my existence. Brock is cruel and unforgiving, and regardless what you finish the last section with in your inventory, the game empties all of your items out before throwing you into this fight, unarmed and without healing. So now on top of the tank, Frank fights Brock unarmed, which is a very unbalanced fight that can be riddled with game-breaking bugs, such as this one, where Brock fell off the tank and couldn't jump back up. I was going to just take the cheap win here because the zombies were whittling away at his health, but when his HP bar hit 0, he never died. He just kept trying to jump back up, but couldn't. So I had to die and restart the fight. However, if you die at any point in this last stretch, you must restart at the final tunnel section and redo both the rail shooter fight and Brock each time that you die. So, I found that the jump kick in changing the level of the tank that you stand on to be the best approach with much less risk than trying to dodge and punch Brock. But it is still a very tense fight. However, with enough boots to the face, Brock finally goes down and falls from the tank into the horde of zombies. Frank then lets out a cry of victory before the screen fades to black, and we are given a text ending explaining that both Frank and Isabella escaped Willamette alive and pursued exposing what had happened here. So, there it is. The story of Dead Rising. A fun time in a shopping mall. But does the game still hold up after all of these years? Well, let's go over all the points and see what we think. On the good side, I have noted down that I think Dead Rising offers us a fun and engaging cast of characters to interact with in various aspects, from both survivors to the psycho bosses. I think that Frank West, as the protagonist, offers a compelling perspective for the player, and his background as a freelance photojournalist helps push the narrative forward as Frank tries to uncover the mystery of what is going on. The setting of the game is an intriguing one, offering the player to answer that question that I presented to you at the start of this video in a multitude of ways, while the clock-based game progression keeps the player on pace and forces them to manage their time spent in the Parkview Mall. Finally, having multiple endings and the bonus chapter in overtime mode allows for the player to explore the game in varying ways and provides replayability for this title. There are areas that are rough around the edges counter to the strong points that this game showcases, however. For instance, a majority of the side missions in the game are escort missions, which when done well can be fun and engaging. However, in Dead Rising, the survivor AI needs to be babysat to an extreme degree as it is unreliable at best and downright frustrating at its worst, with survivors running straight into a zombie horde and getting stuck, having weapons and never fighting, having weapons and only fighting, and general unresponsiveness to survivor commands causing issues in completing objectives. The control scheme is simple enough and effective, but feels sluggish and clunky compared to modern quality of life improvements over game controls. This is to be expected for a game nearly 20 years old, but for anyone that didn't come up playing the games from that time period, it can be jarring and a bit uncomfortable to try and get used to. I'm going to mark this down as a bad point, even if I didn't have too many troubles getting used to it for that reason, but the leveling system can also be rough and unkind, leading to frustration if RNG decides to keep Frank stunted during the early levels. This could make people loath to play the game again if they aren't comfortable with the older design schemes. And the balance of bosses in this game is extremely enemy-weighted, which I suppose in earlier game design this extended the lifespan for the challenge it poses to players, but there are bosses that feel like an absolute chore to beat because of how spongy and resistant to damage they are compared to Frank. There are, however, various ways to cheese the bosses that make them infinitely easier, but for someone just casually playing that doesn't know how to do all of that, I can see it as a downside for some of those new to the series. Finally, after beating the game, you unlock Sandbox Mode, where your only goal is to survive as long as possible in the mall with altered item spawn, constantly draining health, and random NPC spawns. And while this is a cool idea, the constant health drain and hostile NPCs make this mode a bit of a slog to try and attempt. So, ultimately, I loved my experience playing Dead Rising. I have at the time of making this video played through it multiple times thanks to the time skip mod that removes the long downtimes between cases, and I thought it was a charming game with loads of content packed into it, while it is clearly dated at this time. The game still holds up remarkably well, all things considered. My grievances with the game being mostly minor as I enjoy games from its time period and prior still to this day. Issues and all, I enjoyed the character of Frank West, and the idea of Frank just trying to go about his investigation and putting the decision to save other survivors or not into the player's hands adds a weight to the playthrough that is felt by the player every step of the way. The psychos were probably my favorite part of the game, and each have their own gimmicks to learn and combat styles that force the player to adapt and improvise at each leg of this journey. So, here we are at the end of the video, and I guess it's time to rate the game. And yeah, I loved it. It probably sits at about 7 or 8 out of 10 for me personally. And if you are still here at the end of the video, I just want to say thanks for watching. And if you did enjoy it, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more videos coming soon. See, Dead Rising has really grown on me over the last year, and I even learned the speedruns for a few categories in OG1 and Deluxe Remaster, which I also enjoy, even if it is kind of a dead game. I've already talked enough about Dead Rising 1 here today, but I will eventually make my way through and do a retrospective of the rest of the games in the series. But for now, there's some other stuff on the table, like the Silent Hill Marathon we are streaming before the release of Silent Hill F in September, which you can go through with us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, both on here and over on Twitch. All the links for that can be found down in the description below. Lastly, remember to take care of yourselves, and I'll see all of you again soon.